is Jennifer from Akademi, and in today's video, I'm going to be teaching you one of my favorite tricks to know for the SAT reading section. So let's get started. So first of all, we need to make sure that you know what pivot words are. So I don't know if you know what pivot words are, but I'm sure you know words such as but, however, and although. These words signify a shift in the passage, right? And that is why they are called U-turn pivot words, right? And then there are also one-way pivot words such as also, and, furthermore, in addition. And then there are also causal and emphasis pivot words. But today, we want to focus on the yield pivot words, right? So let's take a look at those words together. Admittedly, certainly, granted, indeed, it may seem, of course, and yes. So how are these words used in sentences or in passages? So let me give you a sample sentence. It goes something like this. Certainly, animal testing may seem cruel and harmful to the animals. However, they save millions of human lives every year. So in sentences like these, what the author is doing is they are using a yield pivot word in the beginning of a sentence in order to yield or to acknowledge the opposing argument. And saying, yeah, I mean, you guys do have a point, right? But they always ended by saying, but, however, I am still right, right? So that's the kind of structure that you are going to see with yield pivot words. But what's important in looking at these yield pivot words is that we remember two key words. So what are they? When we see a yield pivot word within the passage or within the question, we want to make sure to look for two key words that are going to direct us to the correct answer. So the two key words are acknowledge and concede. So these two key words are going to help you find the correct answer to the question. Because when the author uses these yield pivot words, they are either acknowledging or conceding, right, to the opposing argument. And that is why we need to look for these two key words when we are looking for the correct answer. So let's put this to the test. I'm going to give you a sample question. It says in line 77 through 79, the author of passage 2 responds to issues raised in passage 1 by. In this case, although we do not see the entire passage or the entire line reference, we can still look at the beginning part of the line reference, which is yes, right? If it begins with the word yes, what did we say it was? It is a yield pivot word, right? And when we come across a yield pivot word, what do we have to look for? What two words did I tell you to remember? Acknowledge and concede, right? We need to look for those words in the answer choices so that we can find the correct answer. So in looking at the answer choices, let's take a look at A. It says conceding. We found it already, right? Conceding a point in preparation for rebuttal. So we found the word concede already, right? So we can probably assume that A is the correct answer, but just to make sure, we want to make sure that the other answer choices do not have the keywords, right? So in looking at B, summarizing the shortcomings of a proposal, it doesn't have the keywords, right? Acknowledge or concede. So B is wrong. C, objecting strenuously to an idea. It also doesn't have the keywords. D, clarifying a complicated issue. It also doesn't have the keywords. So hence, the only one that has either of the keywords is A, conceding a point in preparation for rebuttal. So we can probably assume that A is the correct answer, right? So in knowing what to look for on the answer choices, it helps us a lot to get to the correct answer a lot more confidently and also a lot quicker, right? So because of the word yes that we found in the line reference, we know that A is the correct answer. It's really easy, right? Let's give it another shot on the next question. So for this one, it says in her comment in lines 55 through 59 regarding the diversity and wealth of life, the author does which of the following? So in this case, I gave you the line reference because we couldn't see what the entire sentence looks like, right? So in looking at the beginning of line 55, what does it begin with? Again, it begins with a pivot word, a yield pivot word, which is granted, right? So in looking at the yield pivot word, what do we say we have to look for? Acknowledge and concede. So let's give that another shot. Where do we see the word acknowledge or concede in the answer choices? We see that in A, right? We see again that it has the word concede, right? And in looking at B, C, D, they do not have the keywords. That's why we know automatically that B, C, and D are incorrect, right? So easy. We know right away that A is the correct answer because of the keyword. Okay, good. Let's go to the next one. In lines 101, it may seem blah, blah, blah marketplace. The author of passage 2 primarily does which of the following? So in this case as well, look at that. Another yield pivot word, right? It may seem. So hence, we know that this is the yield category, and so we need to look for two keywords, which is acknowledge and concede, right? So in this answer choice, we come across the word acknowledge, right? So that is why D would be the correct answer, and A, B, and C, because they do not have the keywords, it is incorrect. That's why we know that D is the correct answer, right? Wasn't that easy? Okay, we're going to practice a little bit more. So this one again, look at that. We see certainly, which is one of the yield pivot words. And hence, we need to look for the words acknowledge or concede in the answer choices. And this one is a little bit tricky because of the fact that they are using another version of the word concede, which is concession. It's actually the same word, right? Concede, concession is the same word. That is why A would be the correct answer. And as you can see, B, C, and D do not contain the keywords. That is why B, C, and D are incorrect. We know right away that A is the correct answer, right? Okay, all right, next question. Okay, so this one is another one that's a little bit tricky, but let's give it a shot. Which choice provides the best evidence that the author of passage 2 would agree to some extent with the claim attributed to Michael Merzenich in lines 41 through 43 in passage 1? So in this case, the reason why this question falls under the yield category is because of this phrase, would agree to some extent. What does that mean? It's basically the same thing as yield, acknowledge, concede, right? Where the author is saying, yeah, I do agree with you guys to some extent, but in the end, I still think that I'm right, right? So in this case, we are still looking at the yield category, but we're kind of working backwards, right? So in this case, we need to look for a word, right? A yield pivot word within the answer choice, right? And we already know that yes is one of them. When you say yes, blah, 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 something, 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 what is the author doing? They are agreeing to some extent, right, of the opposing side, acknowledging, conceding, right, yielding. So hence we know that because we're supposed to be looking for a yield pivot word, we can say that B is the correct answer because none of the other words are going to signify a yield pivot word. So that is why for number 32, we know that B would be the correct answer. So I hope that tip helped out a little bit in easing your stress about the SAT reading section. But just remember, practice makes perfect. So practice as much as you can, and I wish you the best of luck on your next SAT.